This is a reading of the second Gorgias, a sequel to Plato's Gorgias, which is part of a collection of dialogues I have written as sequels of Plato's dialogues. In this one, the second Gorgias, I present a dialectical argument between Socrates and Gorgias over Gorgias's claim that nothing exists. We have record of an argument of Gorgias's, where he argues that nothing exists, and even if anything exists, it couldn't be known. And after that, even if anything exists and can be known, whatever that is couldn't be said. Now, since that is obviously something that Socrates would contend against, and since Gorgias and Socrates contested an argument in a more so heated debate than most of the other dialogues, I find that to be a perfect topic for a further dialogue between Socrates and Gorgias. Although Plato didn't reference Gorgias's metaphysical and epistemological views, and focused in that dialogue on the topics of rhetoric and ethics, for reason I think that those were more pressing concerns. There is something of Gorgias's argument that nothing exists makes for something of an obvious topic for a dialectical argument, a further argument between Socrates and Gorgias. And indeed, this also hints at the problem of rhetoric. Sort of along the side. I should say that I don't think Plato took Gorgias's metaphysical arguments seriously. They are presented as a sort of speech in which the arguments are ran through as a monologue. And rhetoricians were wont to, at that time, argue for positions which would be difficult to defend in order to showcase their ability in rhetoric. And I somewhat hint at that being the case, or that being interpreted by Socrates and the others as what Gorgias is up to. The whole theme of the problem of the sophists runs through this dialogue. I try to implicate somewhat Protagoras, the relativism of Protagoras, within the same refutation of nihilism. Gorgias, mind you, was known as Gorgias the Nihilist by later writers. He was known as Gorgias the Nihilist for the text that has been passed down to us, sort of through mediated figures. And I try to without making it explicit, show that that was the sort of trend amongst the sophists. And that's the sort of way they would catch people, that their arguments seemed like a novelty, that the sort of appeal of relativism, for example, of Protagoras, that things are as they appear to you. Things are to you as they appear to you, and they are to me as they appear to me, or things are to each as they appear to each. And Gorgias's argument that nothing exists, that nothing can be known, and nothing can be said. That is something of a sort of trend going on amongst the sophists. For one, that they didn't, and with the rhetoricians, which are sort of the same group, as that's what they were teaching. That the rhetoricians didn't necessarily believe the arguments they were making, which is why I think Plato didn't take Gorgias's argument seriously as a metaphysical position. Why he didn't reference Gorgias's argument that nothing exists. Because also the sophists were wont to make arguments in which they kind of poked fun at their interlocutors, which they didn't believe. We see this in the Euthydemus, that Euthydemus and Dionysiodorus are sort of toying with the boys. They're sort of making fools of their interlocutors in order to show that they are wise. That sophistical arguments were not just fallacies in terms of the form of the argument, but were sort of devices of humiliating an interlocutor such that they would seem clever. As for example, when Euthydemus and Dionysiodorus make Cleinias agree that if he wants his favorite, his best friend to be wise, but he is not wise, then he wants him to be what he is not. And if he wants him to be what he is not, then he wants him to perish. That sort of argument was common amongst the sophists, in which they obviously don't even believe what they're arguing for. And they're sort of making showcases of their indeed ability to make syllogistic arguments, but in a way that is insincere, as well as formally invalid. Likewise, the rhetoricians were arguing for positions which would make the weaker argument, as they say, appear the stronger, in order to showcase that they were competent and excellent rhetoricians, that they could make a position that was absurd seem acceptable or preferable. In any case, I wish not to get into this too much, but you will find that Socrates is presented as a listener of Gorgias's monologue, his speech, at the house of the illustrious Callias, where the sophists were wont to meet and hold these sorts of discussions. And that afterwards, there is a dialectical exchange between Socrates and Gorgias as a conversation that takes place privately after the presentation. The characters of the dialogue are Antisthenes, Apollodorus, Socrates, Aristodemus, Phaedrus, Chaerephon, Callias, Gorgias, and Callicles. The characters are significant also. That Antisthenes is the one retelling the story to Apollodorus. That is sort of the setting. He's retelling Antisthenes, the cynic, who was a disciple of Socrates and started the school of cynicism, but was also a student of Gorgias. He's sort of the middle term between them, and so makes for a good person to retell the story. To Apollodorus, who is also a rather cynic-like figure who is a follower of Socrates. So to begin, and I should say that Antisthenes is telling the story to Apollodorus in order to resolve the problem that Apollodorus has come upon, having heard the same sort of argument. Antisthenes then says, well, let me tell you about the time when Socrates and Gorgias contended over just that issue. And the story is set at the house of Callias. But that should become clear. To begin, Apollodorus. Antisthenes, wait for me. Antisthenes. Who is that? Oh, Apollodorus, one of the few men of these parts whom I am gladdened to chance upon meeting. Apollodorus. And how untrustworthy chance has favored me with our timely encounter. Antisthenes. What makes you say that? And from where have you come? You are not usually accustomed to take this part of the road from the Piraeus to Athens, but usually you take the road straight from Phalerum along the opposing wall. Apollodorus. I will tell you. Earlier, I was to meet someone in the Piraeus who was arriving in the port. And first of all, I should say that while I was there in the Piraeus, I had the thought that you appear in such striking contrast with your fellow Piraeans. For the port, much like Phalerum, is swarming with busy activity, foreign medics and locals alike, hauling wealth and valuable products here and there. And the whole place and everyone there seems to be concerned with one thing: they're transacting the exchange of various goods to be imported or exported. But you show the utmost contempt for that sort of behavior. And although I too scoff at their lowly and aimless business, I can only put myself in perspective when I see the scorn that you have for them, appearing as you do to be a screeching hawk surrounded on all sides by crows. Antisthenes. But you have often seen a noble hawk flee the pursuit of ignoble crows, have you not? Apollodorus. Such I consider to be the worst of omens, and my heart is broken when I see the order of nature overturned and inverted. Yet even now I feel as if I have just been chased by crows. That is why I said, I am so fortunate to have chanced upon you. Antisthenes. How so? Apollodorus. While I was in the Piraeus, I overheard a conversation between a group of young men and what must be an aspiring sophist. I did not recognize the sophist, nor do I know if he is a foreigner or a local Athenian, who's making a daring argument which was altogether troubling and difficult to refute. Nor had those gathered around him any response. He was arguing that nothing exists. Now, I am familiar with those arguments that claim that everything is in motion or everything is one, and think myself pretty well equipped to contend with them. But at this, that nothing exists, I could find no means to repel the daring argument. The only thing I had at my disposal was the assurance of where he got the argument. For I have heard that Gorgias once made a public display of an argument that nothing exists, and that Socrates was present and very well able to unravel the difficulties raised by Gorgias. Now, I know you are familiar with both of those great men and must be aware of the discussion I refer to. So having just been overwhelmed with the same argument which Gorgias previously presented in a public exhibition, I am desperate to hear from you how that argument can be dispelled and resolved. Antisthenes. Good thing that you chanced to find me when you did, for I was there myself when Gorgias gave the public display, and I would be happy to tell you about the conversation that ensued if you accompany me to Athens on the rest of my daily walk to see Socrates. Apollodorus, wonderful. I will doubtlessly accompany you there. I was just on my way to seek Socrates' counsel about how the problems raised by that argument might be contended against and resolved. Antisthenes. Well, I should be able to tell you pretty much the whole story. And you can ask him about anything you should like clarified when we get to Athens. Apollodorus. If you can do that, I would be much indebted to you, Antisthenes, for I am very troubled by that plague of an argument. Antisthenes. I am only glad to recall the discussion between Gorgias and Socrates, as I was also deeply troubled when I heard the argument made by Gorgias. And in addition, I was greatly surprised at his attempt to argue that nothing exists. More so even was I impressed by the genius of Socrates. And I'm quite nearly the perfect person to relate the conversation, as I was at the time a student of Gorgias, but had already been associating with Socrates, and so was well familiar with both. Apollodorus, then don't leave anything out. Antisthenes, I won't. I will even include what I have since gathered about the events leading up to the discussion, of which I was not present with Socrates. Socrates, I have heard, was in the agora with Aristodemus of Cydathenium when they were abruptly approached by Chaerephon and Phaedrus. Phaedrus, Socrates, Aristodemus, we were looking all over for you. You have to join us. We are on our way to the house of the illustrious Callias, where Gorgias is to present a speech unparalleled by any rhetorician. This is not going to be a speech you'll want to miss. Aristodemus. Oh, most excitable Phaedrus, what makes you think that we have an ear for such things? Do you not know that if we go with you, we'll be viewing the event through an entirely different lens? Phaedrus. I don't care what your opinion is about Gorgias and the other rhetoricians. He is to make an argument in defense of the position that nothing exists. Now, is that something you want to miss? Socrates, that nothing exists? I should indeed like to hear the attempt made. If I am not mistaken, Aristodemus too will find that to be a banquet most suitable to our inquiries. Phaedrus, not only that nothing exists, but he will also argue on top of that, that even if anything exists, nothing can be known. And that even if anything exists and can be known, it couldn't be said. Now, I don't think you would pass up the chance to observe such an incredible discourse. For no other rhetorician has even ventured to argue for anything of the sort, let alone something so difficult to defend and be persuasive about. Aristodemus, why, Phaedrus, you are quite right. I wouldn't miss that for the world. But is that the point of this speech? To make a display of his rhetorical ability? Or is he really in earnest that nothing exists? Phaedrus, well, if he succeeds in persuading his listeners that nothing exists, will he not have proven himself the champion of rhetoric? Or have you ever heard a rhetorician defend a more difficult position? Socrates, you mean to ask, Phaedrus, if we have ever heard a rhetorician make a weaker argument than that appear to be the stronger? Phaedrus, yes. Socrates, oh, Phaedrus, Aristodemus here is right, that you will be bringing people that view the display through an entirely different lens than do you aspiring rhetoricians. For we do not care anything for a rhetorical defense of an impossible position, nor for a weaker argument appearing stronger, or for a false argument appearing truer. We only care about the argument itself. But as an argument that seemingly cannot be refuted, cannot but be assented to, and as an argument appearing to be the stronger amounts to just that, thus far we are intrigued by this display of Gorgias. For anyone to whom the weaker argument is made to appear stronger is bound to be persuaded, if the argument shall then seem to them as if it can't be refuted. Chaerephon. But Phaedrus here is also right, Socrates, that the two of you will not want to miss the display of such an argument. Socrates, doubtlessly. Chaerephon. Then let us make our way straight to the house of Callias. Antisthenes. When the four of them eventually approached the entrance of the house, Callias, son of Hipponicus, the master of the house and the host of the event, straightway noticed them before any of the others, and after greeting them warmly, led them inside. Rarely had they before seen such a collection of Athenian nobles and prominent intellectuals in one place. When they entered the open courtyard, they noticed the orator Lysias with a few of his students and his brother Polemarchus, some foreigners and some Athenians, alongside one side of the hallway of the peristyle cloister. Along another covered stretch of the open courtyard, they saw the orator Isocrates with Andron, son of Androtion, and the two sons of Pericles, Paralus and Xanthippus. Further along the same side of the courtyard, they saw Critias, who was accompanied by the brothers Alcibiades and Cleinias, the other Alcmaeonid pair, and various other prominent men they observed as they mingled with the company. The open courtyard within the house of Callias appeared as if it were the royal court of the great king of Persia, full of diplomats, poets, and nobles, centered on either persuading or entertaining the royal court. Then Callias led Gorgias into the courtyard, trailed by some of his students, and everyone awaiting him was immediately seated and arranged to view the performance. The piercing attention of all those sharp minds combined into an air of anticipation, as if they were expecting to witness an event likely to be remembered in future ages. So Gorgias spoke, and his discourse did live up to their expectations. As you know, he first argued that nothing exists. Then he argued that even if anything exists, nothing can be known. And after that, he argued that even if anything exists and can be known, whatever that may be cannot be said to another nor understood through the medium of speech. Afterwards, a sort of gloom befell the company, both in awe of this speech and as if in wonder of what he had done. Few were heard muttering something or other to their neighbors, but most were speechless, never having before heard a rhetorician discourse about anything so daring, let alone anything so profound. The youths present especially were stricken with a sort of solemnness, as that of recent initiates, although not this time of anything holy. Socrates, turning to Phaedrus, noticed that he was overtaken with concern, having latched onto the discourse with such enthusiasm and drunk more than his fill. For not only the youths, but the rest of us too felt an affectation which I can liken only to the feeling one has when they first notice they have drank too much, and the pleasantness of the wine gives way to an uneasy turning of both their stomach and the room. Socrates, seeing that the complexion of Phaedrus had turned ghostly white, and that he looked as if the floor had been pulled out from beneath him, consoled the youth in a private discussion. Meanwhile, some of the company disassembled and went their various ways, while others began to listen in to Socrates' conversation with Phaedrus. Phaedrus. The weight of that tremendous argument, Socrates, overturns everything I've ever thought. Nay, even my perceptions, even what I see around me now, seems like flickering shadows, nay, shades. Not only that, no less than a doubt that these things we see around us aren't really here and aren't real. does the doubt spread over me that I myself am not really here, but all is made to vanish under the weight of the argument. Socrates, oh, my dear Phaedrus, you are but halfway and have lost sight of where you departed from, without gaining sight of where you are headed. Would that Gorgias had not provoked you with these troubles, without displaying something that is not merely in jest for you to grasp. Phaedrus, in jest? You speak as if the argument we just listened to can be lightly dismissed. What console can there be? What console can there be if everything I've thought is false and nothing exists? Socrates, your thoughts you say are false, but tell me, you have thoughts nonetheless, do you not? Phaedrus, and thoughts that err. Socrates, but mustn't they be false about something rather than about nothing? Lest neither would they be thoughts, nor even would they be false, would they? Phaedrus, well, perhaps. Socrates, tell me, is falsehood anything but this, thought or speech of things as they are not, rather than as they are? Phaedrus, no, falsehood must be just that. Socrates, but a false thought is wrong about something and is nonetheless a thought of something, however, not as it is, but instead as it is not. Phaedrus, I suppose so. Socrates, well, a thought that we say is false cannot err about nothing, but can only err about something. Is that right? Phaedrus, yes. Socrates, consider the case of perceptions. Now, these I don't wish to defend entirely, but thus far I doubtlessly will. Perceptions too must be the perceptions of something. Perceptions too must be the perceptions of something, mustn't they? Or could they be perceptions of nothing? Phaedrus, well, on the spot, I would say they are perceptions of something, although they might also err and be false. Socrates, of course they might be false, for we find many of them to turn out false. But even those that are false, of them, can there be any doubt that there is a perception? I mean this, you may well doubt whether or not things are as you perceive them to be, but can you even possibly doubt that you have the perception, whether the perception be true or false? Phaedrus, I guess that cannot be doubted. Socrates, and perception is a passivity, and we receive impressions of things passively, right? Phaedrus, what relevance has that? Socrates, if there were nothing perceptible, nothing to be perceived, we could not receive the perceptions of them, as we are not ourselves responsible for perceptions, nor are we capable of generating them, nor of refusing them. And so whether our perceptions are true or false, we cannot so much as doubt that we perceive, nor that our perceptions are of something rather than nothing. Phaedrus, as you were saying about thoughts, Socrates, similarly, yes. What doubt can there be that we have a thought? What doubt can there be that we have a thought or that we think, even amidst the doubt about whether the thought be true or false? And Phaedrus, what doubt can there be that a thought is of something rather than nothing? As that is, even a false thought must be false in error about something and could not be a thought about nothing. for then it wouldn't even be a thought. And we cannot doubt that we have a thought or that we think. Phaedrus. But then there must be something that exists for there to be a thought. Is that what you are saying? Socrates, that is precisely what I am saying. Callias, you two, Socrates and Phaedrus. The rest of us want in on your conversation. For now that we are few, I think that sort of discussion you are having would be more appropriate. And as you, Socrates, seem to be consoling Phaedrus, why do you not speak so that the rest of us can hear? Or rather, why don't you put your questions to Gorgias here? I don't think he should be offended that he is being contended against, for he argued for a position which nobody here, nobody even on the face of the wide earth, believed to be true. And beyond that, Gorgias claims part of his expertise to be answering questions, and he professes to answer all questions which any may ask. Socrates, I have no objections, Callias, if Gorgias here consents to answer my questions. So what do you say, Gorgias? While we were a great multitude and you were making your exhibition, although I could not entirely keep up with what you were saying, it would have been inappropriate to hinder your presentation with questions. But now, since we are, as Callias says, few, the sort of discussion which proceeds by question and answer would be appropriate.